I'll still not try not to spoil things, but a major part of the existentialist tradition is what's called being unto death. That is a recognition of our finitude and a recognition that we exist and will cease to. Now, that may not be true per se, but the existentialist tradition, as it developed in the 20th century, is a mostly atheistic and materialistic tradition. And so, setting aside the afterlife, even still, there is this idea that the finitude of one's life, even of one's earthly life, even taking into account the afterlife, that having an end point, knowing that death comes for us all, or death comes to us all, whichever way you want to say it, it is, as he says, it's freeing in a sense. It forces you to prioritize. It puts everything into perspective. Martin Heidegger, who was a kind of phenomenologist existentialist, German, not French, probably expounded upon this best, where he points out that our finitude is what allows us to do anything. It is the scarcity of time which forces us to prioritize, and therefore to do anything at all. If we had an infinite amount of time to do anything that we would ever choose to, we would probably never do anything, of any real significance at least. Because we only have a finite amount of time in our lives, that means that we have to actually do something if we want to do it before the end comes, particularly if we don't know when the end will come. Right? So again, as Raphael is saying, it forces you to prioritize in the sense that if you know that you only have a finite amount of time, particularly if you know what amount of time that is, then excuse me, because just like having a limited budget, say, will force you to prioritize in the sense of knowing what's important, knowing what you ought to, what you need to do with that budget. Right? You will avoid those things that have, to use economic terms, say, lower marginal utility. Things that aren't as beneficial or as useful or as good in general. Even if they have some good to them, you wind up needing to do those things which are most important first. And so our finitude, our being unto death, allows us to do things, or allows us to recognize the importance of anything that we might choose to do, and of actually choosing it. So this is a major aspect of the existentialist tradition, and it's a big theme of this game, at least so far. I have a feeling as we move forward as well. Okay, and there's our other aspect of existentialism here. The living your life as you want is especially the important part of it. Now, whether it works or it doesn't is kind of mixing in elements of perhaps stoicism, which, given the circumstances present in this sort of post-apocalyptic game, I could see that. I could absolutely see that as being important. So the Stoic aspect, of course, is being able to separate the action from its outcomes, and judging what the action is, and not just the intent, right, but the action itself, and understanding whether an action, as it is done, as it is committed, is either good or bad, right or wrong, just or unjust, wise or unwise, whatever. And that the outcome is outside of your control. That is due to outside factors, simply things that might go beyond the actual scope of the action itself. And so you can this is the stoic impetus to accept things that you cannot change, or further, even accept the failure at changing something, even if you have attempted to do so and it has not worked. This is one of the key elements of Stoicism, and to integrate it into this setting Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We'll talk about why as we go forward some more. But then the other aspect of this, the last little bit there, live your life as you want. And then her sort of contentment with her life, her choices. The other aspect of existentialism is existence preceding essence. That our existence has no intrinsic essence or nature to it. The existentialists deny any kind of solid or stable human nature or essence to ourselves or even our kind. And so, each of us is essentially a blank slate and a radically free will. And that radically free will, in the decisions that it makes, is what shapes us, is what defines us as a kind of thing. We decide who and what we are to be. And so, Sophie is not an expeditioner. She's not a warrior. She's not a hero. She is... what? I don't know exactly what she does, really. But whatever it is, she's content with it. She's made her decision. She's made her choice. She's defined herself as she is. And Gustav has defined himself as he is, as an expeditioner, as a warrior, as a hero. And the existentialist will point out, this is again a key point that all of the existentialists make, that what choice you make is not ethically significant. The ethical significance is in making a radically free choice, an authentic choice, a choice which does in fact come from your will, your own faculty or capacity for decision making. Faculty isn't the right word. They wouldn't use that. They wouldn't say faculty, but whatever. That it isn't constrained or determined by outside factors, by other people, by something you think you have as an innate nature, by God even. But that the right choice is the one that you make, whatever that is, so long as you have genuinely and authentically made it. Of course, all of this is actually rather a dangerous way of looking at the world and our lives, because it otherwise jettisons so much of objective ethics and subjectivizes a good deal of our decision making. But what? Now, I was just talking about the whole potential ethical danger of existentialism, that it can take away any objective standard for what is the right or the wrong decision, and so long as you've made that choice authentically, or living your best life, so to speak, which is, by the way, that's where that phrase sort of comes from. Doesn't quite matter how or what. It's that you've made the choice. The confrontation with anxiety is another crucial aspect of existentialist thought, and especially as performed by Heidegger. Although, again, Sartre and a lot of the French existentialists also talk about anxiety and our authentic or inauthentic reaction to it. And the line between the authentic reaction to anxiety, which the idea of anxiety here is a profound experience of self-examination, that we confront the realities of life and our sort of thrownness into the world, the fact that we exist, but we don't have to. We're contingent. The world around us is alien in some sense. And that sudden shock of realizing that can lead us to what we come to now call an existential crisis. And that crisis is something that we can resolve, or we can respond to in an authentic way, by understanding it, by embracing it, by taking on the fact that we are alien to the world, but we are this radically free being, and so we make an authentic choice that comes only from ourselves, not from our conditions or circumstances or outside factors or God or nature or whatever. Or we can react inauthentically by ignoring it, by shoving it aside, by perhaps drinking ourselves into a stupor, so that we can dive back into the veiled world of the way we ordinarily think of things, as just sort of constraining and ourselves as being just an ordinary part of an ordinary world, and not thinking of ourselves as this radically unconstrained free beings. And so we get Maxime having at least what the existentialists would describe as the inauthentic reaction to the anxiety produced by death. Death gives us anxiety. It makes it so that we have to confront the fact of our own finitude. And you can do that poorly. And Maxime, I think, is meant to be an example of doing so poorly. It is giving up all hope, rather than embracing the perhaps absurdity of life, embracing the finitude of life and acting despite that, acting in the face of it. He is giving in to hopelessness and is taking the finitude and the nothingness unto which we are all destined, taking that as also a reason to give up any hope, or a reason not to choose anything, not to do anything of significance. Because what does it matter? Well, the existentialists will say that it matters because we choose it. Anything that we choose to do matters precisely because we are choosing to do it, and we will choose to do so. Existentialism has a form of, let's say, memento mori, but it's in a different way. There's a different takeaway from the inevitability of death if you think that death is the end than if you think that death is transition, or death is the end of this life, rather than life in general. Like I said, I do think that you can perhaps, and this is to maybe your interest, Adam, in particular, I think that you can perhaps integrate existentialism into a healthy Christian, maybe perhaps Catholic even framework, but it would have radically different implications and flavors. I think, again, that the way you could integrate is to start over from where existentialism starts. That is to say, noticing our freedom and noticing our finitude. That finitude in two senses. Those two senses are radically different. One, the sense that we are finite as contrasted with God's infinity. And so our finitude is a finitude of scope, of measure, of power, of knowledge, of everything. Rather than what the existentialists focus on, which was the finitude of duration of our lives. Because we know that we are naturally immortal creatures. We will continue to exist beyond our physical death. And, God willing, we will be brought back even to our proper forms, our corporeal bodies, at the resurrection. But our finitude there is still very important in the sense that we only have so much that we can do. We only have so much power, capacity, time even, to do things. So noticing that can still have some of the existential implications, of course not in the same way. Now, the other aspect of our finitude is the inevitability of death, right? This worldly death of our earthly lives. That has implications as well, implications that Catholicism has absolutely explored for way more centuries than existentialism has been around. So, yeah, there is an element to it. The other thing for us to notice and to pick up upon, so our radical freedom still is an important thing to note, but the existentialist tradition as it exists in a secular framework, and exists especially within an almost nihilistic framework, because it was largely in response to a kind of materialistic nihilism, which was more common in the 19th century, which then sort of gave rise to the early 20th century existentialism, which was a reaction or response to it. And so, and then sort of evolved further into absurdism and Dadaism and such things. But we can recognize that, yes, we are radically free. We are, in fact, capable of a form of creatio ex nihilo, Our actions, our choices, arise from nothing but ourselves. And that radical freedom is a really important insight, but it can go right or it can go wrong in ways other than simple authenticity. Right? We can, in fact, do the right thing or the wrong thing because there are things that we ought to and ought not to do. There is still a framework in existence, a framework that involves our own natures and the natures of those things around us, which are solid, stable, and established by God. And so, a Christian existentialism or a Catholic existentialism, aside from just, say, following Kierkegaard, that Kierkegaard was one of the early existentialists and was a Christian, a Lutheran. But taking the existentialist insights in a more properly theistic direction could be an interesting project. But one that I don't know if it's actually really been pursued. No, not to my knowledge. Adam asks, is denial of the future or consequences common in existentialism? No. But I can see how you'd get to that. It isn't denial of the future consequences, but rather like I was saying, a kind of a stoic separation of actions from consequences. Right? When you notice that the consequences of your actions are a separate thing, they're causally distinct, and they're distinct as well in action theory and decision theory from the choice or the action itself. Once you separate these two out and notice that they're different, you can have a sort of blasé attitude towards the future or towards consequences. For example, if I take a drink of wine, it is up to me to drink or not. It is not in the same way up to me whether to get drunk or not. Now that seems like just an avoidance of responsibility, right? Drunkenness is a simple consequence of drinking, but it's not exactly. I can't predict precisely the drunkenness that I will receive from a glass of wine. I mean, frankly, it's minimal, but let's pretend. And so, when I choose to take a sip of wine, when I choose to drink, I'm choosing this in particular, this action. Whether in fact that will lead to me becoming drunk, whether in fact that will lead to me becoming sick, whether that leads to a hangover, whatever. Those are consequences down the line that are caused, yes, by my action. But there are a lot of intervening factors that could alter that. Right? They do, you're right. So Adam says, they seem to have a very eat, drink, and be merry for tomorrow we die vibe. Yes, very much so. But again, that's a lot of elements that they borrow from Stoicism. Because Stoicism has roughly the same point. I mean, it makes roughly the same point, I should say. That when you choose to do something, you're choosing to do something. You're not choosing the consequences that follow from it. Those consequences follow. Or they might not. That might matter based on other factors outside of your control. An example that the Stoics liked to use, Epictetus in particular, but Marcus Aurelius uses the same type of example. If you choose to go to war, you're not choosing to win, right? If you choose to go on campaign, to go to war, what you're choosing to do is either right or wrong from the outset, regardless of whether you win or lose. Because winning or losing is not up to you. It's up to the dance. It's up to the combat. It's up to fate, in a sense, between you and the opponents, and everyone else in both armies. And the weather. And chance. And God. All sorts of things. It's not just up to you. But choosing to go to war might still be a noble thing to do, regardless of how it turns out. And so, we should focus on the actions that we do and the choices that we make, not on what we think their consequences might be. Because if their consequences turn out to be what we weren't expecting or weren't hoping for or weren't thinking, then we're going to be disappointed, and we're going to confuse that disappointment with moral condemnation of the action itself, which we should not do according to the Stoics, and especially according to the existentialists. But the existentialists just take away the moral dimension of this and say that your choice is a choice. That's all that matters, is that it is a radically free choice, that it's an authentic choice that you make from yourself, from your will. And if that is the case, then the consequences are something separate from that. That's something that simply happens. That's part of the world, not part of you. And that you are the thing that needs to be authentic, needs to be making these choices. So yeah, the existentialists are somewhat amoral, and they separate the actions from their consequences. But they don't simply discount the future as meaningless, because it's still you. It's still you suffering those consequences, and then you having to decide what to do in the face of them. Right? Again, how do you hear that and not see the parallels to Stoicism? And again, Epictetus, the first major prominent Stoic, almost said exactly those words. That man is freest in his mind, that man is perfectly free in the mind, that anything internal to ourselves is completely within our control, but anything external to ourselves is out of our control entirely, and we should not confuse the two. And so, we have this element of focusing on that which is in our control, our mind. And that is, as she says, an act of defiance. Against what? Well, against some evil external tyranny, something that is seeking to impose itself upon the radically free self. And we're starting to see hints here of existentialism's anti-theism. Because existentialism, in its sort of mature in the sense that it has developed by this point, its mature form by the mid 20th century, by the time by late Sartre, is explicitly and vehemently anti-theistic, because as Sartre said in one of his later works, he said, if God exists, I cannot be free, but I am free, therefore there must be no God. And the later implication, of course, is that if there were a God, I would be constrained by God, rather than free to make my own choices, entirely absent any external compulsion or command. And so existentialism, in this sense, is a revolt against nature. It is a revolt against what they see as a tyrannical imposition from that which is outside oneself, even if that which is outside oneself is the most natural and most wholesome and good thing in the world. It is still seen as imposing itself upon us. And so it revolts against it. It revolts even against the good, the notion of the good itself. Because if there is some external good, some objective good that is not merely subjective, that is not entirely chosen, entirely voluntary, then that good imposes its own standards upon us. And now we might see some of the roots of the modern error. Postmodern error, perhaps. So, until then, have a good night, everybody. Remember, don't be safe, be well, and more importantly, be good. See, even my little sign-off thing is a bit of a existentialist inspired, but with a proper essentialist twist. Anyway, good night, guys. That was me.